appreciate your insights this morning. Thank you. And joining me on the program now, Liberal MP Tim Wilson and Labor MP Peter Khalil. Gentlemen, good morning to you both. Ivan Toomey, constitutional law expert at Sydney University, says it's very hard to tell what the High Court's going to do. I don't know what hope there is for us, but Tim Wilson, either way, it's all a bit of a mess around Bob Day.
Well, it is an unfortunate situation, but it is something outside of everybody's control, Labor and the government's. We obviously have the matter that's been raised. The government has acted, referred it to the Senate. I presume the Senate will then refer it on to the High Court, but I have no real insight about what the High Court will do, or, of course, depending on the scenario of what they may or may not do, what the outcome then will be. But the key thing is the government acted swiftly and responsibly on the issue to make sure that the Senate is representative of the people of Australia.
And Peter Khalil, what does Labor want answered here in terms of what the government did know and when in relation to the structure of this particular office, which is at the centre of whether or not there was an indirect pecuniary interest going to Senator Day? Because the Family First spokesman this morning is saying on radio, apparently, that they had a letter from Matthias Cormann saying that giving them the all clear for the way that particular office was structured.
G'day, Kieran. Look, I think it's remarkable Tim's called this unfortunate. What an understatement. You've had Dennis Hood, the head of the Family First Party this morning, as you say, confirming that Matthias Cormann, who was Special Minister of State as far back as 2014, knew of this arrangement, ticked it off with a letter, which they've got and they can prove it. And if he didn't even understand the Constitution and Section 44, which is pretty clear, it says a candidate is disqualified if there is a direct or indirect pecuniary interest with the Commonwealth. Now, how this is not an indirect pecuniary interest, I don't know. He actually sold Fullerton for $2.1 million to his project manager, one of his housing project managers, Colin Steiner, and a director on one of his companies. But it was a vendor sale. He actually lent him the money to actually buy the property, and then he pays Bob Day back in instalments. This stinks to high heaven. Matthias Cormann knew about this. Clearly, too, Senator Brandis and Scott Ryan knew about this as well. Tim talks about them acting. How long were they going to sit on this? If Bob Day didn't resign, were they going to continue to take his tainted vote? I mean, at the start, it was about his bankruptcy, and he was going to hang around and vote with the government for the last couple of weeks of the year. But now this is far more serious. This goes to the heart of Australian democracy, and this is very grave and problematic for the government, and this needs to be cleared up. And you asked about Labor, we'll be looking to do what is best for the people of South Australia and the integrity of the Constitution and our democratic system.
Hang on, Peter,
okay,
just calm
Tim Wilson,
down.
quickly,
Take
your
a deep
response.
breath rather than hyperventilating. The fundamental issue is that when the government was aware of the situation on Thursday afternoons, acted, and as you're right, it's important that the Parliament represent the people of Australia and the representatives of South Australia be the people who are eligible and then on to be elected, and that's what we're going through now.
Well, they sat on it for
let's
how
move
long?
on. Peter
How long did
Khalil,
Matthias Cormann know about it?
That's a fair question. I think you've had a fair crack on that particular issue. I do want to ask you about Kevin Rudd, though, his intervention on the Turnbull asylum seeker policy. He says it's pure politics designed to appease the xenophobes. He says it's without any policy merit. Now, is this premature from Rudd, given he doesn't know whether this is the first plank in a number of a multilateral a solution to the ongoing limbo for those asylum seekers on Manus and Nauru? First to you, Peter.
So, Kieran, this government is a government of distraction. It's a government of diversion. Their governance model is diversion. This is remarkable. We haven't even seen the legislation, but from what we're told, we have these ridiculous scenarios that a refugee that would have been on Manus or Nauru, resettled in New Zealand or the US, becomes a citizen of that country, may become a member of their parliament one day, come back as a minister, would be barred from actually coming to visit Tim as a member of parliament if he's still there in 10 years, or any other minister.
I think the bigger question, Peter, is whether you'll still be there in 10 years.
Absolutely.
The Greens are at your doorstep, and I know you're desperately chasing
another diversion, Kieran. Another diversion. This is absolutely ridiculous. And then we see Dutton drag the Prime Minister by the nose out on the weekend to make this announcement, this ridiculous announcement, and it's a real sop to Pauline Hanson. It is reaching out to the lowest common denominator and the darker angels in the Australian psyche. Let's see the details. If there is a broader multilateral solution here, where are the details of that?
Let's get Tim Wilson, your thoughts on this Rudd intervention. It does look like he is, well, obviously taking on some domestic commentary. First time in 3 years he's done that. What's your view on it all?
Well, all it does is reflect exactly the same language he put up there around 2006 and 2007 that led to the watering down of Australia's border protection policies and saw 50,000 people arrive on 800 boats and 1,200 people die at sea. I think Kevin Rudd's intervention in this is truly extraordinary. I mean, on the panel today we have the man who was the National Security Advisor to Kevin Rudd, one of the men who was actually recommending the watering down of Australia's national security laws and lead to these horrific consequences, and people then having to be held in long-term detention. And when we have Kevin Rudd and Peter Khalil all talking from the same talking points, which is to undermine a strong border protection regime for Australia that has negative humanitarian consequences, let me stress this, negative humanitarian consequences, then these people have no moral authority and they're actually going further and undermining Australia's national border protection regime. This can't be allowed to stand. They should look at the legislation, support the legislation, and make sure that Australia's borders are secure.
Let me be clear about this. Tim talks about moral authority. I've said that this has been a morally bankrupt announcement because there's no detail around it. And if you're talking about morality, how are you supposed to explain that any refugee that has been on Manus and Nauru becomes a US citizen, the head of a multinational or a tech company, comes to visit Australia in 10 years' time and is barred from doing
Peter,
that?
The fact
and if it was such an important announcement,
scenario,
votes have stopped. Why are they making this?
Peter, let me ask you the question. Peter, the gentleman, please. Shh. Come on, I know, and this is remote, so you've got to just listen in, please. Peter Khalil, to you, under that scenario, the minister would have the final say. There is still the ministerial discretion under that scenario. If that all did come to pass and someone did want to come to Australia, the minister would then have discretion. So it's not a total and absolute ban.
If the boats have stopped, as the government is saying, Kieran, why are they making this announcement at this time? And why are they making such an announcement which would have such ridiculous consequences? Look, I think they are doing this for politics, for distraction, for diversion. As I said, we haven't even seen the legislation. They haven't even bothered to show it to us or any of the detail. We'll have a look at that. But on its face value, this is a political announcement which is meant to appeal to the worst instincts of the Australian people.
And that's tragically what Peter and the ALP has got wrong. What we know full well is that there have been asylum seeker advocates who have misled and lied people living on Manus and Nauru, detained on Manus and Nauru, and the government wants to make it clear that if there are resettlement options that are available, that they should be taken to third countries because people won't be resettled here. That has been the policy since Kevin Rudd announced it.
We all want to see the resettlement of those people.
It's quite hypocritical and quite rich to suggest that there's something lacking in morality when it's the policy that Kevin Rudd announced.
Gentlemen, just 30 seconds each left. Just quickly, I want to get your thoughts both on this renewed push to water down Section 18C of the Racial Discrimination Act. Tim Wilson, first to you, and then Peter Khalil. I do have Richard Miles coming up after the break, so if you could keep it tight. Your thoughts on this, Tim?
We'll take Miles' time. Come on.
The short and sharp is that this law is controversial because it restricts free speech. I am very open to any pathway to amend and correct it. You shouldn't talk about it as watering down. It's actually correcting the law. And if you would remove things like offend, insult and humiliate, you would actually bring it back into line to the recommendations that saw its introduction in the first place.
Look, Kieran, I know that Tim was the so-called Freedom Commissioner. This law has actually worked very, very well. And people need to understand... Hold on, I didn't interrupt you.
Well, I know, but you can't make spectacular and
on the Bill Leak one, for example, people should realise there's also 18D. And these are exemptions that are in place for things like artists and parody and satire.
Bill Leak is awful for the Human Rights Commission and having to answer for their thought crimes simply for raising challenging issues. If you think taking people before government tribunals is right, Peter, you really need to go and look at a reassessment about what you believe in freedom.
If I can just respond to that, the law has worked very, very well and it's made great progress in Australia to change the culture so that these types of hate speech and vilification is unacceptable. unacceptable.
QUT students are now
I've gone
responsible
through
for
it.
hate
Hold on.
speech. Peter,
Stop interrupting.
Okay.
I've gone
QUT
through it.
students are now...
Let's
Let's put
gone
it
through
clear,
it,
Peter.
and there are...
Do you think the QUT students are responsible for hate speech?
Gentlemen, we're
Yes or no?
out of time. I'm
Do you
sorry.
believe-
I've got
I'm
to
a no.
interrupt.
Are
We've
you
got to
a
go to a
yes?
break. Next time, let's hope you both behave yourselves a bit better because the interjections don't work. The audience can't hear you. So anyway, quick break. Back in just a moment with Richard Miles.